Hello and welcome from the First United Methodist Church in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. There's an old preacher's joke about standing at the back of the church, shaking hands as people are going out the door, and having somebody come up and say, I don't think I'm going to be here next Sunday. I am just really tired of hearing the same music over and over and over again. The preacher said, What exactly do you mean? He said, Well, every time I'm here, it's always the same thing. It's either Silent Night or Christ the Lord is risen today. Well, heads up. This Sunday, we're going to be singing not Silent Night, but the other one. And we're going to be singing it loud, and we're going to be singing it happily, and we're going to sing a lot of verses, and we'd be very happy to hear you sing it with us. So come and join us. Christ the Lord is risen today. Here's what this sermon will say about that after a little more music. These words from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, from the 15th chapter, beginning at verse 19. If for this life only we have hoped in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have died. For since death came through a human being, the resurrection of the dead has also come through a human being. For as all die in Adam, so all will be made alive in Christ. But each in his own order. Christ the firstfruits, then at his coming, those who belong to Christ. Then comes the end, when he hands over his kingdom to God the Father, after he has destroyed every ruler and every authority and power. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. A lot of people may be familiar with a phenomenon called HMKS, or Holiday Morning Kid Syndrome. It appears generally in children under the age of, about 7 or 8, the tops. But it does have identifiable symptoms. Primarily, it's insomnia. Usually around an hour and a half, somewhere in there, before the parents would normally wake up. The child, or sometimes in some places it's children, will wake up and find it impossible themselves to remain in bed. Even if they do their best, they try, but they can't do it. What follows next will vary from family to family, but often it involves shouts breaking out of, he was here, or was he here? Was he here? Can I look? Can I go? Come on, can we get up? please, can we? At which point the parents are probably wide awake already. Once the kids have gone downstairs, there follows a frenzy of some sort. Usually the was he here turns into, hey, look, he was here. He, again, depends on the holiday. He might mean Santa Claus. But this time of year, he probably is the Easter Bunny. And there's a whole series of paroxysms and what formally is called a fracas that breaks out right after that. A frenzy that involves parents being grabbed by the hand and dragged out of bed with screams again of, look, can I, ha. There are some ways to alleviate some of these symptoms. Doctors and grandparents generally do not recommend going after them. But if you want to try, sometimes the symptoms are relieved, at least for a little while, by chocolate. Later on, if that begins to wear off, sometimes hard-boiled eggs will help. But usually, it takes time to work itself out of the system. Now, I know that this is a pale and almost frivolous, maybe a little bit forced analogy. But there is a distant echo in that of something very important, something that is joyful, but also solemn, and also demanding of attention. And that is what is connected to Easter morning. It's the reason Easter morning is Easter morning. And that's the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. Because when he arose, he didn't just say, well, what do you know about that? When he arose, he didn't just say, I guess I better go back to my carpentry. When he arose, it wasn't just about him. It was about all of us, the family of God. And when he arose, he began the process of getting the family of God up along with him, pulling up the whole human family, if he can, from the night of death and sadness, pulling us out into life and hope and joy and excitement. But in fact, said Paul, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those that slept. He's the first one up, not the last, but the first one, the one who's there to wake everybody else up and say, come on, it's time, arise, get up, awake. There's something great out there to go for. For Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have died. For since death came through a human being, the resurrection of the dead has also come through a human being. In a lot of Eastern Orthodox icons of the resurrection, Jesus is depicted like he is in this one, not just rising up from the grave, but dragging Adam and Eve with him out of the dark world of the dead into God's sunshine, out of the ground into fresh air, For as all die in Adam, so all will be made alive in Christ. See, the resurrection isn't just the end of the story of the crucifixion. The resurrection is the beginning of the story of the rest of the world, the rest of time, the rest of eternity. Jesus doesn't just at that moment wipe away everything that is wrong. The things that have been going on to that point are still going wrong. When he rose from the dead, the Roman Empire was still there. Herod was still king. Pilate was still doing his thing. But the world had changed. The authorities, the powers, the rulers, things changed. And they were no longer, and they are no longer, in the position they thought they were or think they are. The resurrection isn't a complete wiping away of all that goes on in the world, but it is a sure and certain sign, the sign, that God has begun the process of setting the world back on track, of initiating and confirming his rule and his reign, his eternal kingdom. It's a sure and certain sign that the people who have been in trouble, who have fallen into sin and death, and all that goes with it, they are being saved. We are all being saved. And God has begun in his own time and in his own way to put things back in a shape that in his own time and in his own way will get back to the way he wants them. But each, Paul said, each in his own order. Christ, the first fruits, and then at his coming, those who belong to Christ. Then comes the end when he hands over the kingdom to his Father after he's destroyed every ruler and every authority and power. For he must reign until he's put all things under his feet, all his enemies under his feet. And the last enemy to be destroyed is death. The resurrection of Jesus is not the end of that process. It's the turning point. It's the moment when the fever breaks and you know that the patient will get better and the healing has started. It's the moment when the lost sheep perks up its ears because it hears the voice of the shepherd calling for it and coming in its direction. It's the moment when the first raindrops begin to fall that are going to end a drought. Or it's the moment when the floodwaters have been cresting, but just at that moment begin to recede. And the river will return to its course. The resurrection is that moment in the early spring when you go outside because you are wondering if that tree that you planted last year has made it through the winter. And you look at the branches and you see the first, smallest, palest green leaves. are beginning to come out on the branch. The resurrection of Jesus is not the end of our troubles, but the moment when we can be sure, positive that the trouble will come to an end. Positive that no matter what happens, as things ultimately unroll, we'll be okay. And I say trouble, but it's far more than simple trouble. For he must reign until he's put all his enemies under his feet, and the last enemy to be destroyed is death. The faith that puts its trust in a God who has ended the power of death to destroy things that are good and true is a faith that gives us the ability, so very much needed, to go through the world in a way that recognizes that whatever is in front of us right now, the end that lies beyond it is God's. It's what allows us to mourn, but without despair, to grieve, but without bitterness, to bear up under injustice without hating the oppressor or the tyrant. That faith in a God who has the future is what lets us look at a fallen world and say, yeah, it's not done yet. It's not finished. God still has more to come. But we know it's good. And he hasn't given up and never has. It's faith that allows us to say, we haven't arrived, but we're on the way. And to be patient with others and with ourselves, sometimes even with God. It's how Christians have always found faith and found the ability to go on, even at times of the deepest trouble. The English poet and preacher John Donne and his wife Anne had 12 children. The 8th was stillborn, and 3 of the others died before the age of 10. Their last child also was stillborn, and Anne died in the delivery. Donne's writings show that after one of his children died, he was in a condition where he didn't have enough money to pay for the funeral himself. Can you imagine what that must have done to him? And he lived at a time when the plague was still passing through both London and the countryside every couple of years, exposing them all to yet more danger. But one thing he had, and never lost, was faith. And because of that faith, he had courage. And he wrote one of the most defiant sonnets ever. You've probably heard at least the opening words, "Death, be not proud." Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou think'st thou dost overthrow die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure. Then from thee much more must flow, and soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and souls' delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and dost with poison, war, and sickness dwell, and poppier charms can make us sleep as well, and better than thy stroke. Why swell'st thou then? One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. So there. If for this life only we have hoped in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have died. For since death came through a human being, the resurrection of the dead has also come through a human being. For as all die in Adam, so all will be made alive in Christ. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia.